Hey everybody, it's Dalton. I want to talk to you guys about a football jig. My last video, we talked about some trailer selections. I kind of keep that simple. And I finally got to stop and do a video. I had two military jets that were flying over my head, and I couldn't even hear myself think, they were so loud. So they're either taking a break or they're done for the day. There's three things I want to talk about when it comes to a football jig. Number one, weight size, okay? This is the 3/8 ounce, this is a 3/4 ounce. If you throw these things in the water together, they're pretty much going to look the same. This is a net bait pocket bug. So weight size simply helps you to fish a football jig the way it's supposed to be fished, on the bottom. That's the best way to fish a football jig. If I'm up here in the shallower area, I'll probably go with a 3/8 ounce or maybe a half. Right now I'm sitting on top of a ledge, so it's pretty deep out there. I'm going to go with this 3/4 ounce. Now, while I'm talking, I'm going to cast this out because it's going to take a little bit for it to sink down to about 30, 40 feet off this ledge. So weight size will help you maintain bottom contact. That's the key. The second thing I want to talk about is where to throw a football jig. Where you want to throw a football jig, guys, is always hard bottom. Rock, clay, sand, gravel, anything like that where you have a hard bottom, because if you throw it in mud, it's just going to sink down in there and you're going to fight the jig all the way back. So I've got it cast out. I've got it on hard bottom. That's key to a football jig. I've got the right weight so I can maintain bottom contact. And now what I'm going to do is just slowly drag it, hoping to hit little rocks, pieces of wood. I'm hitting something. And while I'm doing that, because of the shape of the head of that jig being a football jig, I just felt a rock. It's kind of like a fumble in a football game. You'll see that ball just kind of go all over the place. I watch my line, and I just kind of slowly drag it up this ledge. I feel little rocks, and that's what I want to do. If it gets a little bit caught up, I just give it a little pop, and I just drag it all the way up. Now that's with my rod tip up. One of the ways that I actually like to throw a football jig, again, we'll give it a second to kind of sink. But if you think about a Carolina jig, you're going to usually have your rod tip down and you're going to do a sweeping motion. That's kind of the same way I like to throw a football jig, except I'm not going to do quite as wide of a sweeping motion. I do better with a football jig when I fish it slower. So it just hit the bottom. And what I do is I just kind of drag it maybe a foot or two, let it set a second, bring it back, drag it a foot or two. And the main thing I'm doing when I'm holding my rod this way is I'm watching my rod tip, okay? Sometimes when I hit a rock, I think it's a bite, but it's not. So if I watch my rod tip, it'll go dunk, and I'll know the difference between hitting a rock or getting a bite. And I just kind of sweep it along really, really slow. If it gets a little hung up in something, I give it a little jerk. This is 99%, I'll say 95% of the way I throw a football jig. There's another way to do it, okay? It's along the same lines, the same principle. And I want to wait till it gets out there on the bottom. And one of the things that I like to do is I like to use my reel to drag the jig along. This is when I'm probably going to move the jig a little bit faster. So I definitely want it heavy enough to where it's going to stay on the bottom and not come up. So right now it's on the bottom, and all I'm going to do, I watch my rod tip. My rod tip's telling me right now I'm maintaining bottom contact, and I just simply reel it back. I'm not swimming it. It's not up off the bottom. I am reeling it back, hoping to hit some rocks, maybe some wood, something that's going to allow this football jig to kind of deflect. That's another way I do it. Those are the primary two ways that I do it. The first one I do the most. There is one more though. If you're fishing and you know that the bass are super duper active on the bottom, let's say they've ran into a school of crawdads, okay? And you know they're after them. One of the things that I like to do, I don't use this retrieve a lot, but if I think it's going to work, I'm going to use it. So once it hits the bottom, I'm going to stroke it. Okay, that's what it's called, stroking a jig. All I'm doing is just popping it off the bottom and letting it fall straight back down and thump on the bottom. This 3/4 ounce is going to make some noise. Sometimes if I'm not getting a bite, I'll do 3 or 4 rounds of this just to see if I can get a bite, if there's any real aggressive bass down there. guys, to be honest with you, those are the only 3 retrieves I ever use with a football jig. The one thing I want you to keep in mind, there's actually on YouTube quite a bit of underwater footage on this. I think we would be amazed how many times a bass is looking at our lure when we have it in the water. And I think I'm guilty a lot of times of pulling the lure away from him. So when you're throwing a football jig, and this is good with any bait, by the way, but if you're throwing a football jig, you want to keep in mind that a bass is looking at it. And what they do is they go nose down and they just kind of hover. I've seen them do complete circles around a bait. You just maintain the bait the way you're doing it, work it the way you're doing it. You already got their interest, and work it all the way back to the boat. And a lot of times, just before I get it to the boat, or just as I start to reel in, bam, he'll take it right there. He was following it the whole time. So think in your mind, every time you throw this thing out there, there's a bass looking at it. Well, I hope this video helps. Like I say, I'm going to work this bait exactly the way it's supposed to be worked. If you can find a bunch of gravel or something like that, that's perfect. You can drag that thing through. It's going to pop. It's going to make noise. The bass are going to know it's there. I hope this video helps out, guys. I appreciate you all. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you next time.